For some of you, you may know, some of you may not. When John Horan was inaugurated, in his maiden speech, he spoke about an issue he had around development squads, and an issue he had around what actually was going on at grassroots level in the GAA in terms of the word elitism. So he formed a committee, which has been, I have to say very, very clearly, has been brilliantly chaired by Mick Dempsey. So well chaired that he sat down there and let me stand up here. This thing about a Corkman who thinks, the Corkman with an inferiority complex thinks he's the same as everybody else. That's a bit like me. But I suppose being on a committee in Croke Park, for those of you who have and haven't been, it's a very, very interesting experience. And certainly for me, getting the opportunity to speak on behalf of the committee, I just hope I do the committee justice. Because the committee we had is full of people who are absolutely passionate about Gaelic games, full of people who are working at schools, in clubs and intercounty, and are extremely, extremely, as I say, passionate and want to see the association moving into the best space possible. And I suppose for me personally, then it gave me the opportunity to meet these people. And I suppose over the last 2 or 3 years, you'd have to say we've become friends. But at the very outset of these meetings, we took a decision that despite the ideas that we had, and despite maybe some of the understandings we had, this committee would have no teeth unless we actually got out into the country. So Jenny Duffy just put across at one meeting, why don't we go across the whole country? Why don't we hit 32 counties? And when we hit those 32 counties, why don't we hit school teachers, club coaches, parents, administrators, full-time GAA staff, as many of the stakeholders as we possibly could think of, we were going to hit them. And better still, why don't we put them all into one room? And we discovered in these 32 workshops that we actually were, for the first time ever, putting into one room these various stakeholders, inclusive of, as I say, teachers, club coaches, academy coaches, administrators, parents, and under 16 players. So for the very outset, actually putting them into the room, if it did nothing else, it brought them close together and gave people an understanding of where they're coming from. And then, I suppose, the big thing for us is that we had seen, and you can see the dusty covers here, we had seen numerous reports done before by the association, by very, very, very good people. And we had seen, some of the things that we had in our head before this started, we had seen, hang on, that has been said before. But I suppose the big thing for us was, it was said before, but there was no change. So we made a commitment to ourselves that we would do everything we possibly could do to ensure that whatever findings came out of this research piece, we would do everything we possibly could do to make sure that that change would be implemented. So that was our raison d'etre, you call it. That was our starting point. And as I said, we went to all 32 counties over the space of maybe 6 or 7 or 8 weeks. In doing so, we gathered and we met over 1,000 stakeholders. And we gathered about 7,000 pieces of data. So this isn't made up. It isn't, ideas that we had at the start, just put them in a different language. This is, the findings in this piece are the language and the desires and the wants of the stakeholders all over our country. They're not Mick Dempsey's, they're not mine, they're not anyone else's in the committees. And I would hope to think that anybody who was at one of those meetings who picks up the document and reads it would see, hang on a second, this is exactly what we discussed. So it's a real document. It's in your bag. It's a real piece of research. It's a real document. And for us, we think it's a very, very apt in this moment in time, and I'll get to that later on. So when we had these 7,000 pieces of data and we analysed them, we saw some stuff that worked very, very, very well, and we saw some things that weren't so good. One of the big things that struck us was the network of facility all over the country, the infrastructure. So everywhere we went, people spoke about, it's brilliant to be able to train inside, and I suppose, brilliant to train inside in a top-class facility. The picture you see there is the Tipperary Institute, and the Tip young fellas inside there on a Friday night. That was mirrored all over the country. And having the opportunity to go in there, it was a huge plus to these young boys. So much so, I actually spoke to one boy in one county, in Tyrone actually, where he spoke about having the opportunity after training to sit down, and they were giving him a bit of grub, and the senior team would be training at the same time. And he said over the years, this fella now was under 21 with Tyrone, he said when he was started under 15 or 16, he said over the years, he said Sean Kavanagh used to sit down next to him. And at the start, he didn't know who he was. Within a number of weeks, he was telling him about playing midfield. Those kind of things you can't buy. So you're part of something. And certainly the stakeholders felt that they were very much part of something, and the infrastructure was a key piece in that. The other thing as well is that the parents and players especially spoke about the access to a higher level of coach. So they felt that the coaching at academy level was a bit above club level certainly, and in some instances a bit above school level. On top of that, one other piece that needs to be mentioned is that most counties, their full-time staff had a key and current role in the activities at academy level, and they were spoken about very, very positively too in terms of their experiences and how they add them into the academy structure. So they were the three big pieces, and very, very important pieces. But unfortunately, there were four very, very big pieces in terms of things which could be better. I suppose the key one for us is the one you see there, the child, youth, adult player pathway. There was a feeling on the ground that people didn't actually know what they should be doing at particular stages. There was a feeling on the ground that even though the academy might be under 14 or 15 or 16, that it had adopted a kind of a higher status than the club and the school. There was a feeling on the ground that people were within the academy trying to drive a certain agenda. And that agenda, very simply and very bluntly, is people spoke about elitist practices, people spoke around elitist messages, but all of the academies, bar none, they weren't resourced enough to do what you saw this morning in terms of Arsenal. A million miles away from that. Yet we continuously pushed out a message about you're now at this level, so you must behave this way, you must do these things, you must do this. And that's not serving the association well, in our opinion. But whose fault is that? That's not certainly the coach's fault or the academy administrator's fault. That's a fault of the world, in a way. Because the professionalisation and commercialisation of sport in general, including our own here, has pushed a certain agenda. That if you want to be good, if you want to be the best, you have to access all these things. Maybe that's not true. Maybe in our context, that's not true. So there was a feeling that we're missing a guiding light. There's a feeling that we're missing a roadmap. There was a feeling that we need to get our hand held a small bit here. Now, you know better than I do, guys. Irish people, we don't really like being told what to do. We ultimately do our own thing. The research calls that street-level bureaucracy. That at the bottom of the pile, we have control of what happens. Yet, that being the case, it was constant all over the country, people speaking to us. We would love direction here. We would love guidance here. So that was the big, big piece. On top of that piece, there was, despite many, many great efforts, and you saw them all outlined this morning, there was a feeling that we want more education. We want more nuanced education. If I'm in the academy, or if I'm in the club, or if I'm in the school, I should be accessing some information that's slightly different to the guy who's in the different context or the different domain. If I'm going forward to give all my time into the academy, the GAA in my county should be looking after me a bit better to say, okay, you can now access this level of education, you're going to get this CPD, you're going to get better, and we're going to improve you. There's no coach in the country that I've ever met who wants to just stay the same. Everybody wants to improve. Everybody wants to find a way. I think as an organisation, and certainly the people we interviewed and we sat with, they all want to find a different way. They all want more. And it's incumbent on the organisation to give them more. On top of that, and a lot of you might, experience this, but we have situations where parents and young boys especially, they don't know where they're going. They don't know what's up next. They don't know who's in charge of them. You have opportunities here with our situations where there's 12 or 13 maybe activities in a week for a boy. Now that might sound huge, but that actually can happen. You have some boys who are playing hurling and football in their county, with their school, with their club, on numerous teams. Everybody's pulling at them. There was a boy in one county on one of the nights that we were there in one county in Munster, and he stood up and he said, you know what? And it was very brave of him. He stood up and he said, my coach only values me when I can play for him. When we asked him how many other coaches he had about 7 or 8 more. But he's of no value to any of them until he can play with them. But if you have the elitist message being driven from the academy or from society in general, what it ultimately ends up happening is either first up, best dressed, or the club is pushed to one side. That's the reality. And the last big piece was the fixtures. Now that ties into the piece before, number 3. 3 and 4 are interlinked. But again, games programs all over the place. School matches on, club matches on, inter-county academy training on, everything on top of each other, no synergy, no organisation, complete dysfunction. Now let's call a spade. We're all GAA people. We all come from clubs. This is the reality of the situation that's happening for young people all over the country. And we're the adults. We're the guys, the people guiding this. We are us. And either we're administrators who are saying, I can't do it any other way, or we're parents and we're just accepting it, or we're club people and just accepting it. But the reality is there's 16-year-old boys and 15-year-old boys and 17-year-old boys, and they're totally at odds with what they need to do. And I'm not even going near proper development in terms of player development or personal development. This is the next day, what's on tomorrow. It's a hamster on a treadmill and it's just speeding along. And we're all standing idly by. So what the report is aiming to do is, it's saying, hang on a second, we need to draw a line in the sand and say stop. That first piece, point 1, that elitist message, what that is actually doing is, and I just mentioned a while ago, it's driving the club game into one corner. Now that may be okay in terms of senior inter-county adult activities, and it possibly is in lots of ways, but when I'm 15 or 16, our committee feels that that's not okay. So we have to respond. So we responded with 4 key recommendations in the report. Now, as I said, on this slide you can see these recommendations came out of the data, came out of the workshops, came out of people's mouths. These are the 4 key pieces that need to change. Now, I or the committee, none of us live in a utopian world. All of us understand barriers to development. All of us understand traditions. All of us understand culture. But we're absolutely adamant, unless these 4 things change, then we're going on a very, very sticky wicket. And I'd almost argue that it's just nearly at the point of being too late. That's how important this is. So, this diagram you see here in front of you, this is our new framework. This has been passed by Cuthbert, it's been passed by Central Council, it is now GAA policy. So, as a picture, I hope it can explain, even just by looking at it, what it actually implies. I don't think it's complex, and if anybody saw Des Ryan's piece this morning, it's based on an Australian model that Des referenced, and it's used across Australian sport by 43 or 44 NGBs. So we haven't plucked it out of thin air. It certainly is based on academic empirical research. But what we've done, if we have GAAified it, we have made it that when it's up on a wall inside in a dressing room or inside in a committee room, everybody looking at it can understand what it is. And the big piece that should jump out at you is that blue circle in the middle, that F3 space. What's that? It's the club. It's the club, the central part of our organisation, the place where we all come from. As an adjunct to the club, you'll see this here. This is the talent space. T1, some counties are going at this at 13 because minor went to 17. Some counties are sticking to 14. So T1 is a place where we can't say somebody's talented, really. He's 13 or 14 years of age. But we say he has potential. So that needs to be very, very broad. And moving into T2, that can be an amalgam of the school game at junior level and under 15 / under 16 academy. Again, what we're doing here is we're probably verifying potential to say somebody may be talented. And then in T3 space, that might be senior college's game plus the under 17 competition. Now for us, this is the first space where you have All-Ireland competition. Not down here, and certainly not down here. In here at the moment, we have under 14, under 15 competitions where people are, treating them as mini All-Irelands. What purpose are we serving? I'll let you answer that. In here, the same. We feel, even at present, putting 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds out there in front of 60,000 people to play an All-Ireland final is not right. People might argue differently, but as a committee, we feel that must change. And ultimately then, when you talk about synergies, this T4 space here, and we're not getting into an age grades debate, this report was never intended for that, but this T4 space here is a key piece of transition into the elite space, which is senior hurling and football. Here, this could be the college's game, it could be the under 19 or under 20 competition, whatever it may be, but as you can see, what we've developed is a long-term approach to elite development, but at the same time, maintaining the key function of the association and prioritising it, the activity at club level. Fed by F1, this is the nursery in your club, where we're focused on functional movement, FMS skills. Here, this is pre-competition. Here, it starts from under 12 up. So here might be 7 to under 12. Here is once we enter formal competition, and the idea is we remain in that for our whole lives. For our whole life. That it's such a good experience that we don't ever want to stop. But unfortunately, at some stage, we have to stop. But when we do stop, that you become one of us. That you work for your school, you work for your club, you work for your county, whatever it is. And you want to get better, and the association supports you. But the biggest part is that you've had such a positive experience in the GAA, you stay in it. Now, what we have discovered that in this space at the moment, what happens is this transition piece here, the intersection, this is difficult for a lot of people. This isn't managed. This involves texts of deselection. I think Pascal Ann referred to it in the Independent during the weekend. Some fella he met in Kerry got the dreaded text out by text. And these boys, when we meet them, this is extremely important for them. And I'll talk about more of that in a minute. Now, Jimmy Darcy has developed a video on this, and I think this is a key time to actually play this so that we get an understanding of what this actually looks like.
The GAA is Ireland's largest sporting organisation and plays an undoubted role in instilling in us all our sense of place, culture and identity. We have our roots in every village, parish and town in Ireland, and this affords us the opportunity to provide lifelong experiences for all, which are enjoyable, positive and enriching. Central to these experiences is the playing of our family of games, whereby players are supported to reach their potential, whatever that may be. Reaching one's potential as a player is not a straightforward process. In fact, it is a very complex journey that generally follows 3 different paths. Some players try out Gaelic games at a young age, but ultimately end up inactive or active in other sporting pursuits. A small minority experience high-performing sporting environments and inter-county competition at adult level. For the vast majority, being part of the GAA is a lifelong club-based experience whereby they transition through a developmental journey to become adult participants in local and county-based competitions. Regardless of which pathway players experience, there are many twists and turns in the journey from child to adulthood. To help us understand the journey a bit better, the GAA has developed a player pathway framework. The framework has 2 main purposes. 1. empowering our players to own the direction of their own development. This simply means that the player and his club will be firmly positioned at the centre of an individualised development journey that is very much focused on long-term outcomes. 2. Ensure that best practice becomes common practice in our clubs, schools, development squads, third level institutes and county teams. In doing so, our focus switches from matches and training to the advancement of key relationships between the player, his coaches, his parents and significant others involved in his development. The Player Pathway Framework focuses on 3 main stages of development: foundation, talent and elite. These 3 stages each have associated phases, all with an outlined focus and key priorities. The foundation stage is where the majority of our players reside and focuses on activities within our clubs especially. We pride ourselves on our influence on our local community, and the positioning of this stage within the framework ensures that the club is the central component in a player's development. This stage is divided into 3 phases: Foundation 1, 2 and 3. Foundation Phase 1 refers to our initial involvement in Gaelic games, usually at nursery level. Here the focus is on acquiring and learning basic movements and having fun. Acquiring these skills early in life allows children to experience a sense of achievement and remain involved in sport and physical activity for life. The second foundation phase exposes children to the family of Gaelic games and the skills necessary to perform game actions. It builds on the previous phase by ensuring that children are only exposed to low-level competitions such as our Go Games model. Once children enter formal club and school competitions, they have entered into Foundation Stage 3. The majority of players will continue at this stage until the end of their playing career. Foundation Phase 3 is represented by a real commitment to training and competition, as well as the development of a sense of belonging to the GAA in general. Therefore, it is crucial that we support players to transition into the F3 phase and provide them with positive experiences so that they are retained as lifelong participants. These experiences must centre around appropriate games programs and quality coaching. While in the F3 phase, some players who demonstrate potential may be invited to experience the talent stage of development. This stage has 4 phases: Talent 1, 2, 3 and 4. These phases should be viewed as an add-on experience to club-based activities, especially since only a very small minority of players will become elite adult players within our games. The introduction to this stage is Talent Phase 1, whereby those players who are perceived to have the potential to be classified as talented at a later point in their journey are exposed to practices at regional squad level within individual counties. Some players, on verification of this potential, move to Talent Phase 2 and are given further opportunity to demonstrate their coachability, commitment and their motivation towards fulfilling their potential. In the third phase of the talent stage, T3, the focus turns to continual performance improvements and involves representation on senior school teams and inter-county underage teams. The final talent phase, T4, is where the player is at the cusp of breaking through to a senior inter-county squad. Most of these players participate at third level competitions and require individual support from club and college coaches, as well as inputs from high performance specialists. Finally, when players break through and are selected to represent their county at senior level, they have reached the elite stage. This stage is characterised by a high performance training environment involving many individualised support services. In time, the framework will be supported by a player development programme. The framework and the programme will have a lasting impact on the development of our youth. Crucially, they will help us to provide the right support at the right time, which in turn will allow players to reach their full potential. Most importantly, the framework allows us to visualise a new approach to player development, a vision that accounts for individuality and variance, a vision that represents the realities of the developmental journey, a vision that has the end in mind. The end point, crucially, may not be on Jones's Road, but for the majority, it may be within a club environment that supports, values and develops its people so that their engagement with the GAA is sustained for life.
Now, the cruciality of that first recommendation is, I suppose, based upon the fact that only 1% will get up to that Stephen Cluxton picture. 99% remain in the blue. When I go back to this and I see this space here, that is driving a lot of the policies here and some of the policies here. Like any of you involved in clubs, which you probably all are, you see things seep down. But ultimately, 1% end up here, 99% of our players remain in here. Yet at the moment, things are weighted much to the advantage of this space. Now, the committee is not saying for 1 second that this space isn't important. There's 3 things need to happen when the child comes in here. He or she either goes out here, and because of the FMS skills they've learned, they have an active life for the rest of their life. The child goes in here and never gets into the space, but is content and happy and looked after and cared for inside in this space. The child goes into this space and has potential and can go in here. And here, the message is continuously about being better to go back in here. Why? Because only 1% ultimately go here. That is not the message we're selling at the moment. And we have to think of our context, our history, our tradition, our culture. It's about in this space. It's about having positive experience in this space to make this space even better. And that's a different mindset than what we currently have. So, the second recommendation regarding coach education builds on the first recommendation. Why? Because we use the same framework, and into that framework we input coach education at the various stages. So there's coach education. If you're a senior inter-county manager, you should be getting our senior inter-county coach. You should have access to some level of education that is applicable to the level you're at. That must be different than doing a nursery inside in your club. So that's where we need to go in that space, and it's vitally important, because without the education piece, the first piece can't happen. I sat with a coach in my own club last week where he told me, he's under 14, that he's programmed to win. Yes, he told me. He's programmed to win. And I said, well, that means you're going to be disappointed maybe 50% of the time. Programmed to win under 14. And they won an under 14 competition, and it was happy days for them. We're on the right track. Maybe they are. But the point I'm trying to make is we cannot be simply programmed to win. And the way we can change that is through education, married to the framework. The third one is a key piece again in terms of governance, because loads of people told us we don't know who's in charge. We can't turn to anybody to tell us what should we do. There's nobody protecting the welfare of my son, people told us. He has to go, because if he doesn't, he's going to get dropped. So the GAA have to put people in charge. And the report is recommending that at national level, that you have coach education manager, a player development manager and a sports science manager. And that those positions will be mirrored at provincial level, so that the message at the top, the mothership here, I equate it to an octopus with tentacles, can get down onto the ground in provinces, get down onto the ground in counties, and ultimately get down onto the ground in clubs. Without proper governance, that can't happen. And they're all interlinked. The games programme. We have situations in some counties where children don't have matches for 3 months. We have situations in other counties where children have matches every second weekend. We have situations in some counties where children have appropriate games programmes. If we don't have proper games programmes, we can't have development. If we don't have proper games programme, we can't have engagement. If we don't have proper games programme, we have people just walking out the door and playing something else where they can get a match every week. Again, tied in with governance, until this is sorted, we can't have proper player development. So in totality, you have a new framework, coach education, governance and games programme. You sort those 4 issues, the GAA feels a bit different for boys who are, and girls who are 15, 14, 15, 16. It becomes something that maybe we all grew up with. It becomes something that we all would love it to be. But the report is saying what we think it should be, it's not quite that at the moment. It's something slightly different. And I think very clearly the GAA has, I suppose, espoused 5 or 6 values over the last 2 or 3 years in particular. And these values, and today is all about values, but these values are what we say we are. We're about having values, we're about a certain culture, we're about inclusivity, we're about holism, the whole person, and we're about the club. The report is saying to us that we are not living our values. The report is saying to us that we're a million miles away from our values. We're a million miles away from holism. We're a million miles away from inclusivity. What we're actually saying is, come on in. If you're very, very good, we look after you. You know, if you're not so good, you know, find some other things. Maybe find some other sports. And that's actually reality on the ground. Clubs sending out messages to people. We only are picking a certain amount of players. Maybe you join a different club because we don't have capacity for you anymore. So if these are our values, if this is what we're striving for, you know it and I know it, we're a million miles away from this. So that's why the report is crucial. It's drawing a line in the sand and saying, hang on lads, it's time for change. Time for somebody to say stop. Time for something new. Time for somebody to say, let's give the people what they actually want. That feeling you all grew up with. The feeling of belonging, the feeling of connection, the feeling of somebody's minding me, somebody's looking after me, somebody thinks I'm special or they value me. I'm not saying that's not happening across the country, but what I'm saying is we're moving in a different direction. We're moving away from that. And with that comes those 4 or 5 big challenges. Challenges around education so we can change things. Challenges around people giving in terms of fixtures. Challenges around, focusing on our clubs and on our place of being. And challenges around curriculum. Because the framework is no good until we develop a curriculum to support it. So that people no longer ask what it is at under 14 we should be doing, what it is we should be doing at under 15 Talent Academy, what it is I should be doing inside the university. We have to be strong on that, and that has to be built because, as I say, this work is worthless until that comes on. But I suppose more importantly, if anybody wants to see where we're at, this text tells the perfect story. The text is small, the script is small, you mightn't be able to read it. So very quickly, training for the FAILA. This is about FAILA, under 14. Starts on Wednesday. It'll be on every Wednesday. This is in November. The FAILA starts in February or March. And even though training times are early, players must be at training 20 or 30 minutes before training starts for foam rolling. Right? You get a foam roller if you haven't got one. And stretching, because this is imperative for improving flexibility and reducing muscle injury. Maybe it is. I don't know. If players are injured or unwell or have played with the school the day of training, there is still an expectation of attending training. And we will have a separate rehab session for anyone who cannot do a full session. So I don't care whatever else you're doing, you're still training with me. This is my team. And then, FAILA Championship starts around the end of February 2020. If you have commitments to other sports or other activities and cannot give a commitment to a 90 to 95% of the sessions between now and the end of February, please let me know because I have a limited number of 25 places only. And if you cannot commit, I want to offer this place to another player. There will be still be a place for you in the club on the B or the C team who are starting training early in January. Some of this 25 will also be part of the B team for Challenger Championship games. Please let me know whether your child is interested in this or not. That's not made up. That is true. That's the message we're sending out to parents. That's the message we're feeding to children under 14 in the club. You tell me that we don't need to change? Proof of the pudding is in the eating. 100% we need to change. And most particularly, when you look at where we actually are, 2020 isn't the same as 1985 or 1995. It's totally different. If I'm 15 or 16 now, I live in a world of likes and identity, which I could have about 4 or 5 of. I have a social media persona. I might have a persona in school. I might have a persona at home. I could have 2 or 3 different, actually, social media personas. I can be whoever I want. I can pretend to be whoever I want. But we say to somebody, I have the power to say that you're not good enough. I have the power to decide at 13 or 14 that you're not good enough and I'm deselecting you and you'll go back to your club, as it's called, that famous sentence, go back to your club. So I make this decision at 13 or 14, even though science is saying I have no real proof. If I'm in Arsenal, I do have proof because I can measure it so carefully. But if I'm in Cork and I'm in a development squad and I have the boys for 20 times in the year, it's difficult to actually have that type of information. So I'm making a decision based on my hunch, whatever I feel. And I think you're not good enough at 14. And I send you back to your club, as I say. In this day and age, children won't accept that. They don't accept not being good enough, which is great, but unfortunately they probably don't have the resilience to take that bang and come back. They'll revert into a different persona, into a different identity, and we lose them. They go off and do something where they will be accepted, because acceptance is their biggest piece. So, when you marry that to the text that you just saw, to the difficulties that were outlined in our investigation, you now see that why I'm saying it's a crucial time, line in the sand time for this organisation. It's an absolute line in the sand in terms of sense of place, tradition, the feeling of Irishness, the feeling of belonging, our culture. All those things are being hugely challenged because of our actions as the adults here. To me, the GAA is unequalled all over the world in terms of sport. The idea that you play for where you come from, you represent your people, you strive to be the best you can be for your family, for yourself, for your place, that is nowhere else in the whole world does anyone else push themselves to the limits that we do for that. We are challenging that usually by our behaviours. And the report is crucial, as I say, in terms of saying, hang on, bang, stop. And it's going to take strong leadership from here. I've no bones about saying it. Somebody is going to have to stand up and say, we need to change. And that's why we have been confident and we're buoyed by the fact that the people who have read the report have come back and said to us, you're on the money. Times need to change here. We need to provide a different avenue for development. We need to do something different here. The roadmap is in the report. The big question now for us is, do we actually want change? Or do we want to keep doing the same things that we always have done? Do you as a person want change in this organisation? Ultimately, we'll still have the game in 20 years' time. Will we still have the same players? I'm not quite sure. The choice is ours. Go míle maith, Gailléir.